After a hard day at work, I was driving home, anxious to celebrate my wife's birthday, but fatigued by the notion of surprising Emily with the jewelry hidden in my briefcase brightened my spirits as I entered the house. Laughter and discussion rang out from the kitchen, where Emily and our daughter Sarah were engaged in a spirited, "Honey, the large event you set up last night was wonderful. I had no, I had no idea your guy was that talented. I want more." Emily's voice echoed with, "Curious." I stayed in the hallway, keeping out of sight but within. Emily's voice remained filled with excitement and a feeling I couldn't quite understand. He definitely caught me off guard. It was a huge surprise. My heart hammered. Who was she talking about? Sarah's young, earnest voice made my thoughts rush as I tried to piece together the riddle. Broke through my thoughts. "I knew you'd adore it, Mom. He's wonderful for you, unlike Dad, perfect friend." What did she mean? Confusion and mistrust swept over me. As I tried to interpret their talk, there was a deeper message that I couldn't understand. I quietly moved closer to the kitchen, my pulse racing with each step. Emily and Sarah were plainly sharing secrets, possibly too private for me to hear, and their words hung in the air. Refusing to make sense, recollections of the preceding few weeks ran across my memory, the occasional late-night phone calls, Emily, sudden passion for dressing up for girls' evenings out, and the subtle changes in Sarah's behavior when she felt I wasn't watching. Each minute now seemed like a piece of a puzzle constructing a picture. I hated Emily's laughing, previously given me comfort, now felt laced with distrust. Were they preparing something behind my back, perhaps a surprise party, or was there more to this newfound love for a brilliant friend? I needed answers and clear proof. Before making any allegations, it was more than just suspicion. It was about safeguarding the integrity of my family. After what seemed like a lifetime, I quietly withdrawn my trust in them. Mind churning with questions and concerns, determined to learn the truth, I resolved to maintain a tight watch and gather evidence quietly and face them only when I have irrefutable proof that. As I laid in bed beside Emily, who was sleeping comfortably, I stared at the ceiling, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that gnawed at me. The necklace in my briefcase felt like a heavy load, symbol of love clouded by doubt. Tomorrow, I told myself I would begin exploring the truth. In the following days, I watched Emily and Sarah intently, analyzing their interactions with a new feeling of vigilance. Every hidden glance, every hushed phone conversation, every late night outing became a piece of a puzzle, gradually unveiling a truth I wasn't ready to face. One evening later, Emily had gone to bed, so I discreetly snuck into the kitchen, where her phone was charging on the counter. The pale glimmer of the screen softly lighted the room as I carefully unlocked it, my heart beating as I went through her messages. I was hoping I was incorrect there. It was a sequence of texts from someone named Mark that left little question. I can't quit thinking about you after reading your book last night." Words sliced through me like shards of glass, confirming my darkest fears that Emily was having an affair. Anger and hurt battled within me as I received more texts, each showing a glimpse of my wife. I never knew how she could do this to me. And Sarah, what role did she play in all of this? My hands trembled as I took screenshots of the incriminating communications to ensure that I had evidence to confront them with. Betrayal sank heavy on my shoulders, yet amidst the agony, a steely resolution took root. The next day, I addressed. Sarah was in her room, immersed in her textbooks, when I knocked and spotted Elle on the door. "Dad." She looked up surprised, and Sarah's eyes were filled with anxiety, and I added, "We need to talk." Despite the conflict within me, she hesitated and closed her laptop, beckoned for me to sit next to her on the bed. "What's wrong, Dad?" I held out Emily's. "Do you want to explain this?" Sarah's face grew pale. As she viewed the screen, her eyes widened in recognition. "I can explain, Dad. Explain what, Sarah? That you're helping your mother cheat on me. The vitriol in my voice astonished even me. Like that, Dad, she objected, tears welling up in her eyes. Mom, she was lonely, and Mark is merely a friend who sends her notes like this. Sarah's shoulders slumped when I retorted sharply. I thought I was helping her father, but she seemed sad, and I wanted her to be happy again. My fury eased slightly when I saw the remorse and confusion etched on her face. She was just a young woman caught in the middle of her parents' failing marriage. Sarah, I understand you want it to help your mom. I replied more gently, but this isn't the way to do it. We need to talk to Mom jointly. She agreed with tears running down her cheeks. I'm terribly sorry. Dad, I never intended all of this to happen. I understand, Sarah, I remarked while resting, calming hand on her shoulder. But we need to tackle this predicament together that evening. Emily returned from work. Sarah and I sat calmly in the living room, utterly unconscious of the brewing tempest, with serious expressions greeting. Emily's smile faltered as she went in. What's going on? I stood up, gingerly laying her bag down, and pushed her phone toward her. We need to talk. Emily's eyes darted. Between me and Sarah, her astonishment rapidly turned into anxiety as she observed the screenshots on the phone. Jim. What is this you tell me, Emily? I said calmly, despite the inner maelstrom within. Who is Mark? Emily's face turned ashen, her hands quivering as she grasped the phone. Jim, if it's not what you believe, explain it to me, I demanded, my tone increasing firmer. Emily looked at Sarah, who sat next to me, with her eyes bent down. Sarah, maybe you should not, Mom. Sarah interjected, her voice surprisingly firm. Father deserves the truth. Emily groaned heavily, her shoulders dropping in disappointment. Jim, Mark is merely a pal. It's a little more complicated than that, I repeated. I couldn't believe how convoluted Emily's messages can be. Acknowledged, tears gathering in her eyes. I made a tremendous mistake, Jim. I never intended for any of this to happen, but it did happen, I remarked gently. Now we have to. Facing it. The room sank into a heavy hush, the scent of treachery thick in the. Emily and I locked eyes, and unspoken whispers passed between us about our marriage. Had built over the years was suddenly breaking apart. I need some time to reflect, I finally replied, moving away from Emily. Imploring eyes, I'll be staying at trash for a bit. Emily nodded solemnly. Sarah, her eyes streaming with tears, reached out to grasp my arm as I passed. Face a mix of sorrow and remorse. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. I managed a shaky. As I drove to John's, I smiled warmly and squeezed her hand before walking out of the home. We were in turmoil, fury, despair, and a tremendous sense of loss. But amidst it all, a determination seized me. I couldn't allow this treachery to define me or destroy our family. The truth had been revealed, and now we needed a plan to confront Emily, decide the fate of our marriage, and protect Sarah from the consequences of our damaged trust. One evening, unable to bear the weight of Decep anymore, I entered. Emily and Sarah were deep in conversation in the kitchen, with the clink of glasses and the faint aroma of dinner hanging in the air, a sharp contrast to the anguish inside me as they turned to see me standing there. Disbelief registered on their faces. Faced with the gravity of the situation, I demanded my voice. The stillness in the room was thick and stifling, revealing both hurt and rage. Emily's eyes raced between me and Sarah, looking for words to excuse the transaction. Sarah squirmed uneasily, her guilt visible even in the dim kitchen light. It's not what you think, Jim. Emily finally managed, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. I held up a hand to stop her. I went out of the kitchen, leaving their pleas unanswered. The truth was revealed, and with it came a clarity that compelled action. In the solitude of my study, I sank into Chair feelings rowing inside me, betrayal, hurt, and a deep-rooted resolve clashed in a stormy storm. I needed a plan to navigate through the shards of our destroyed marriage, salvage what left of our family. My thoughts moved to Jan, my dearest friend, confidant. He had been a constant presence throughout my journey, offering wisdom and support when I needed it. Without hesitation, I picked up the phone and phoned his number, knowing he'd understand the gravity of the situation. "Hey Jim, what's up?" Junk's usually joyful voice contained a Ingo concerned John. "I need to chat to you," I said, my voice firm despite the anguish inside me. "Oh sure, buddy, come over," Jan replied, sensing the urgency in my tone. Minutes later, I found myself in John's living room, the weight of my confession heavy on my shoulders. I narrated Emily's affair, Sarah's inadvertent involvement, and the confrontation that Jan listened patiently as I was reeling from a mix of fury and hurt. "Jim, I'm sorry you're going through this. What do you want to do?" "Now I want to confront them," I said, my mouth tightened. Determination. "But I also need to help them comprehend the implications of their." John nodded seriously. "What are you thinking?" A strategy began to form in my head. A strategy that would turn Emily's approaching birthday into a reckoning, a moment of truth that would drive her to confront. "I'll wait till the pieces of her betrayal come into place." David raised his brow, sensing my intent. "Voice and what happens after that. I'll offer her a gift that she'll never forget." I responded, my words dripping with bitterness. The following days blurred. I kept an external illusion of normalcy by combining anticipation and diligent preparedness. Though the tea between Emily and me boiled just beyond the surface, Sarah caught in the crossfire of our. As Emily's birthday approached, the exchanges faded into a stillness that spoke volumes. I diligently planned for the divorce papers to be drafted up and discreetly placed where they might be easily located at the proper moment, ready to deliver the ultimate blow on the night before her birthday. Emily slept, her features softened by the tranquility of slumber. The lady I had loved, trusted, and made a life with now seemed like a stranger, her betrayal engraved into every line on her face. The morning of her birthday arrived. With a troubled heart, I made a decision that evening with flickering candles and the warmth of gathering friends. I handed Emily a beautifully wrapped box. Her eyes, she gleamed with excitement as she untied the ribbon and removed the lid instead of the expected Ed jewelry or cherished keepsake. The painful reality of our damaged marriage sat inside divorce papers nicely folded and ready for Emily's. As she took up the papers, her fingers trembled and her grin faltered. Confusion turned to incredulity, and finally to dawning fear as she read the lines that sealed our fate. "Jim, what is this?" Her voice quivered, eyes wide with amazement and happiness. "Birthday, Emily," I replied slowly, my voice devoid of the warmth it once contained. "Consider this my gift to you." The room grew silent, the air thick with tension as our friends exchanged confused glances. Emily looked up at me, tears pouring in her eyes. "You can't be serious," she whispered softly, audible over the hammering of my heart. "I'm entirely serious," I responded, my tone unwavering. "This is the consequence of your choices." Sarah stood nearby, her a mask of guilt and anguish. "Dad, please," she pleaded. "Not now, Sarah," I murmured. Emily's hands shook as she held the papers, her voice shaking with emotion. "Jim, please, let's talk about this. There's nothing left to spoke about." I stated my resolve was hardening. "I trusted you, Emily, with." I turned and walked away, leaving Emily to face the consequences of her choices as the celebration disintegrated into. Friends whispered and murmured their reluctant sympathies as they went one by one, and in the silent aftermath, I packed a bag and left the house, the weight of my decision weighing hard on my shoulders. As I drove away, I noticed Sarah stood in the doorway, tears running down her face. I couldn't bear to look back after the argument. On Emily's birthday, I found comfort in the unflinching support of my buddy John. He was my rock throughout the struggle, bringing guidance and strength when I needed it the most. Together, we developed a precisely prepared strategy to face Emily and ensure justice was served in Jay's living room. Converted into our war room, strewn with legal papers, timetables, and devastating evidence of Emily's infidelity. As we combed over texts and receipts, the reality of our mission became clear, dissolving a marriage that had once held so much promise, now tainted by betrayal. We need to be strategic about this, Jim John stated, his brow wrinkled. We need to make sure Emily understands the significance of her acts. I nodded grimly, my thoughts racing with the details of our strategy. The divorce papers need to be ironclad, with no space for loopholes, and the timing needs to be perfect. John pressed his pen against the table, deep in thought, while file 4, divorce, alleging irreconcilable differences and infidelity. The proof is sufficient enough to sustain our case. We created the legal documents. Every word bore weight, a monument to the betrayal that had broken our lives. John's legal experience proved crucial in helping me through the intricate maze of procedures with the I really wanted answers. We also need to explore custody arrangements for Sarah, J.N. remarked in a soft manner, yet practical. She's stuck in the middle of this, and we have to prioritize her well-being. Sarah was unknowingly lured into her mother's affair, divided between devotion to her parents and the I made a quiet pledge to protect her from the fallout as much as possible in the days ahead. Passed into nights as we perfected our strategy, each second spent preparing for the ultimate encounter with the weight of impending change weighed thick in the air, like a storm gathering momentum, as Emily remained ignorant to the tempest about. On the eve of our next move, I found myself standing outside our home, gazing up at the familiar windows bathed. Emily was most likely going about her evening ignorant of the gentle lamplight inside. Seeing the tempest rising just outside her reach, I filled myself with purpose. As I entered the house, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Emily was in the kitchen with her back turned to me as she prepared dinner. The sight, Jim welcomed me hesitantly, her familiarity now tainted by betrayal stirring mixed emotions within me. Her voice was tinged with apprehension. We need to talk. I met her eyes, my tone crisp and brief. Emily turned completely to face me, anxiety written clearly into her features. Is everything all right? She questioned, her voice quivering. Are far from okay, I said, my voice barely hiding the wrath bubbling behind. We need to examine what happened. Next, she hesitated, her gaze seeking mine for answers she was terrified of finding. Jim, can we work through this? She asked. I shook my head, feeling the weight of Emily, with our broken trust sitting hard on my shoulders. There's nothing left to work out. Her shoulders dropped in quiet acceptance of her shame. I never meant to hurt you, Jim. Just lost, I echoed, bitterness creeping. Is that what you call it? From my perspective, it seems like you. Emily's eyes welled up with tears as she took a deliberate decision to betray her marriage. Her voice barely a whisper. I realize I made a terrible mistake, but please don't do this. This isn't just about you and me. Anymore, I continued, my voice firm despite the anguish within. It's about trust and honesty, and right now we have none. The talk between us was laden with unsaid facts and shattered dreams. I turned away, unable to bear the sight of her agony any longer. I've spoken to my lawyer. I finally said, my words measured. We are filing for divorce, Emily whispered, her palms shooting to her mouth in horror. Jim, please don't do this. My mind is made up, and my resolve is unshakable. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving Emily standing alone in the debris of our marriage. Outside, the night air was chilly against my skin, in stark contrast to the furnace of emotions boiling within me back at John's. We completed the remaining elements of our plan, and the divorce papers were properly prepared to assure a quick and definite conclusion to our marriage. Every legal loophole was closed, every scenario planned for. It's done, John. I bowed my head as Jim handed me the final documentation. Set with resolve. It's the only path forward for both of us, John. I got home in the morning to find Emily in the living room, her eyes red from tears. Sarah lingered nearby, torn between. Jim, Emily spoke gently, her voice shaking, of her loyalty to her parents. Emily responded, "Please, can't we talk about this? There's nothing else to discuss." My tone is polite but firm, and the documents are all ready with my lawyer Emily's. Face bowed in misery, the weight of reality falling down around us. I meant to hurt you, Jim. Please believe me. I did believe you, I said gently. Emily, my heart is heavy with sorrow, but trust is earned, and I can't trust right now. Sarah went forward, her voice trembling with emotion. Dad, please don't. I didn't want us to break apart, so I knelt alongside her and took her hands in mine. Sarah, this isn't about you or your mother, and I have to figure things out. She nodded, tears flowing down her face. I love you both. I love you too, Sarah, I replied softly, bringing her into a tight hug. Embrace, and no matter what happens, it will never change. As I stood up and met Emily's gaze, seeing the agony and regret written in her eyes. I'm sorry, Emily, I murmured quietly, but I had to do what is best for me now, so I left the house, leaving behind the shattered ruins of a life that had held promise. The road ahead was unknown, laden with obstacles ahead, but amidst the rubble of lost trust, a flame of hope burned within me. For a future predicated on honesty and reconciliation, Emily's birthday arrived with an unpleasant tension hanging over our house. The customary bustle of preparations felt hollow against the backdrop of imminent revelation. Guests arrived throughout the evening, their happy pleasantries a stark contrast to the conflict brewing within me. Emily interacted with acquaintances from a distance, her smile tight and brittle. Sarah hovered nearby, her eyes flitting between her mother and me, sensing the unsaid tension that threatened to spill over at any time. As the evening continued, I found myself attracted to the boundaries of the gathering, unable to connect with the spectacle of celebration. John's steady presence at my side was a lifeline and a silent reminder of the plan we had diligently developed. It's time, Jen muttered softly. Audible over the D of talk, I nodded, preparing myself for the confrontation that would redefine this evening. With steady steps, I approached Emily, who stood near the center of the room, her back to the audience. Emily, I said, gently forcing her to look towards me, her expression a mix of anxiety and surprise. Jim, she responded warily. I have something for you, I stated evenly, holding out a gorgeous, wrapped box, her brow pinched in confusion as she accepted the gift. Emily undid the bow with tentative hands, and the room appeared to pause its breath. Removed the top, revealing the contents within. Her breath caught in her throat as she drew out the divorce papers. Documents stark and unrelenting in their finality, the color drained from her face. Emily stammered, her voice quivering, as startled silence resonated throughout the room. Happy birthday, Emily, I replied icily, my words slashing through. The gasps and whispers echoed across the room as the gravity of the situation hit our guests, and they exchanged perplexed stares, unsure how to react to the unfolding. Some gazed at Emily with sympathy, while others turned to me with a mix of horror and interest. Over Emily's hands trembled as she held the papers, her voice barely a whisper. Jim, please, this isn't the proper timing or place. There's no better time than now, I retorted, my tone barren, of any warmth you brought this. Emily's eyes welled with tears, a volatile mix of rage and terror churning within them. You can't just do it. This I can, I said firmly, my resolve unwavering, and the room fell. Emily studied our words, which hung in the air like a dense fog. Sarah looked across the room for encouragement, but instead saw a sea of faces reflecting the severity of our destroyed marriage. Approached hesitantly, her voice shaking with passion. Dad, please don't. I went to her, heartbroken by the image of my daughter, Sarah, caught in the center of our torn family. I am sorry you have to see this, but your mother and I cannot continue like this. Emily turned to Sarah, pleading, Sweetheart, go to your room. This is between your father and me. Emily forced tears to stream down her face, torn between her loyalty to her parents, Mom Sarah. Sarah unwillingly nodded and left from the room, leaving behind a tangible sense of sadness and regret. As I watched her leave, my heart was heavy with the weight of my decision. When I returned my gaze to Emily, she was staring at me with, Jim, your blend of defiance and resignation has made your point. Is this really what you want? What's required? I said steadily, my voice softening despite the pain inside me for both of us. Emily's. Her shoulders dropped, the fight fading from her as she folded the papers and placed them on a neighboring table. I didn't think it would come to this, and neither did I. I admitted the constant aching in my chest, but here we are. The remainder of the evening went in a whirl of forced conversations and unpleasant goodbyes as people left one by one. John remained by my side during the pillar of. As the final guest left, I discovered support in the ruins of our shattered lives. I was alone with Emily in the silence of our home, and the air was thick with unspoken words and shattered dreams. I'm sorry, Emily, he replied quietly. It was a vivid reminder of the affection we previously shared. Breaking the somber pause between us, she nodded with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Jim, for everything. I turned and walked away, leaving Emily to face the. In the aftermath of our betrayal, the way ahead seemed uncertain and plagued with hurdles, but among the rubble of broken trust, a flame of hope burned within me, a hope for a future founded on honesty and healing. Packed my bags, my daughter ran into my room, tears running down her face. Dad, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to. I sighed, pausing in my packing to look at her with a mix of regret and resignation. Sarah, it's not only about apologies. There are repercussions to our acts, and we must all face them. She approached me warily, reaching out to grasp my arm. Please don't leave, Dad. We can work through this. I need some time to ponder. Sarah, it's not only about what occurred. It's about trust and rebuilding, so her Tom's lips shook, and she blinked back. Cries, but Mom is sad. Can we talk about this as a family? I wish it were. That's simple, I murmured, my voice tight. I need to digest everything right now. I'll be staying with John for a while. Sarah nodded, her countenance crescent. I understand. Just don't shut us out totally, Dad. I won't, I told her, placing a hand on her shoulder. With a heavy heart, I resumed packing, ignoring the agony in my chest, and prepared to depart the home that once felt like the center of our family's world. Sarah lingered in the doorway observing. Slowly, as I grabbed my items after what seemed like a lifetime, I zipped up my suitcase and lifted it off. Turning to Sarah, I forced a small sad grin. Take care of Mom, okay? She nodded. With her eyes overflowing with unshed tears, I shall leave my daughter. Standing there, I made my way downstairs steps. Emily was in the living room, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She looked. Jim began as I entered, a mixture of hurt and regret etched on her face. I held up a hand, shutting off her words. Emily, we need time. This isn't easy for either of us. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted to hurt you, Jim. Please trust me. I know, I said quietly in my heart. Emily reached out gingerly, aching from the anguish in her eyes, but trust takes time to rebuild. Yearning to touch me, but stopped herself. What happens now? I'm going to remain with John for a bit, I stated softly. Emily's shoulders dropped. The weight of our damaged marriage was obvious in every line of her face. I don't know if I can accomplish this on my own, but you're stronger. You realize, I said, trying to inspire confidence in her. Look after Sarah, we'll work out the rest as we go along with that. I turned and proceeded toward the door, pausing just momentarily to look back. Emily stood there alone in the faint light, her eyes following me with a mixture of longing and resignation as I stepped outside into the chilly night air. I exhaled deeply, trying to calm my emotions. The trip ahead seemed uncertain, but among the anguish, amid sorrow, a ray of hope flickered. Hope for healing, understanding, and, finally, forgiveness. The divorce proceedings were difficult and fraught with high emotions on both sides. Emily tried furiously to alter the terms in her favor, but with John's unflinching support, I remained resolute and focused on a fair outcome. This isn't easy, John said one evening over dinner at his. But you're doing the right thing by holding firm through all of this. I nodded and pushed my food around my plate. Without any hunger, I just wanted to end for everyone's sake. John placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. It will be shortly, hang in there. Months have gone. Every day came new problems in the form of legal consultations, paperwork, and intense negotiations, but I found comfort in routine and the persistent support of friends like John, who kept me grounded during the storm. One lovely afternoon, while sorting through boxes in my new apartment, I felt a sense of peace. The divorce papers were finalized that morning, marking the end of a horrible chapter in my life. I took a deep breath, appreciating the peace and the freedom to create my own path. A knock on the door. Startled out of my thoughts, I opened it to see Sarah standing there hesitating on the doorway. Dad, she said, gently, her voice tinged with trepidation. Can we talk? I stood aside, welcoming her. With a nod, she entered gingerly, looking around the new place. Nice place, she observed, trying to break the tension. Thank you, I said, gesturing. What brings you here, Sarah? She fidgeted with her hands, looking for the appropriate words. I wanted to apologize for all that happened. I sat opposite her and studied her face. It wasn't just you. Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I've been more honest with you, Mom. We all make errors, I replied gently, reaching out to hold her hand. What matters now is how we move forward. Sarah nodded again, her shoulders sagged with relief. I've missed you, Dad. Things haven't been the same without you. I've missed you as well. I acknowledged, a lump forming in my throat, but I needed time to sort everything out. She nodded, understandingly. Are you okay now? I smiled, though it was bittersweet. I'm getting there. Is a process. We talked for hours that day, catching up on the months we had spent apart. Sarah told anecdotes about school and her plans for the future. I listened, appreciative for the opportunity to reconnect with my. As dusk struck, Sarah stood up to depart, stopping at the door. Dad began tentatively. Do you think we can try to be a family again? I considered, her words attentively, feeling a ray of hope stir within me. I think we can try, whispered with a weight lifted off my chest. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. I replied, thank you, Dad, for giving me another chance. Thank you for coming. Let's take it one step at a time now that Sarah has left me. Standing in the doorway, filled with a fresh sense of optimism, the road ahead would be difficult, but as I closed the door behind her, knowing that together, we could manage whatever lied ahead. As the months passed, I focused on, while I was mending and rebuilding my life, John stood by my side, offering support, encouragement as I navigated the hurdles of beginning afresh together, explored new activities, and reunited with old acquaintances, finding moments of joy among the healing. On one clear fall morning, I sat on the veranda of my new home, sipping coffee and watching the leaves rustle in the breeze. The air was fresh and full of promise, and I felt at peace. Jim John cried out from across the yard as he walked over. "Smile, you look like a new man." I chuckled, indicating for him to join me. "It's been quite a journey," John nodded understanding, taking a seat alongside me. "You've gone a long way since everything happened, and I committed to reflect on the obstacles and growth. I never thought I'd be here starting again." "You deserve this," John replied truly, clapping my shoulder. "Handled everything with grace and strength." I smiled gratefully, appreciating his comments more than he realized. "Thank you, John. I couldn't have done it without you." We sat in companionable silence for a time, absorbing in quiet surroundings. The past seemed distant now, a chapter closed but not forgotten I had. Later that evening, I gained crucial lessons on trust, resilience, and the value of self-care. Sarah called, her voice timid but optimistic as she apologized once more for the grief she had caused us. We talked for a long time, expressing our hopes and anxieties, and gradually mending our damaged friendship in the weeks. Emily also called out, expressing regret and a wish to find closure. We met for coffee and kept the conversation light but honest, recognizing the past without dwelling on it was a step towards forgiveness, acceptance, allowing us both to move forward with peace in our hearts. With each passing day, I felt lighter, and the weight of bitterness and hurt began to ease. I immersed myself in a newfound sense of hope and possibilities. Myself at work, taking on new projects and objectives with renewed zeal. One afternoon as I sorted through old photographs in my study, I happened upon a picture of our family from happier times. I smiled longingly, tracing the faces of Emily and Sarah with fondness. Despite the agony of the past, I cherished the memories we shared. I knew it would take time to rebuild trust, but I was eager to invest in the future. With Jay's support, I contemplated joining a local community group, anxious to interact with others and give back to. As the seasons changed and winter gave way to spring, I found myself among a group that had helped me through difficult times. Looking forward to what lied ahead, life was far from ideal, but I had discovered a feeling of calm and purpose in. During my rebuilding journey, I was ready to embrace the future and leave the past behind.